So I just cannot get the assault out of my mind. Black Templars, Coronate Glory, Berserkers of Scalathrax, and Necrons. So I already have a good base of Flayed ones, and this carried over in 4th edition when they were extremely useful with Pariahs. Remember those guys. Essentially, the Pariahs had a bubble that would lower your leadership by 2. The Flayed ones would go in, and from there you'd have an additional leadership test, and then I'd use the powers of the Satan, when they were actually star gods out there, the Deceiver, to basically pin units, especially fearless units. I mean, a lot of you guys new to 40K. This just isn't some old 40K player saying back in the day it was much better. There were a lot more lulls moments. There were a lot more moments where if you had the right alignment, if you had the right things connecting, you pulled off some pretty interesting tactics. And that's not to say that the dice didn't win the game in 40K back then, because it's always been a D6 based system, but you had more tactical flexibility. So I say that because I've got a base of 20 or 30 so 20 painted, 10 unpainted Flayed ones. And I've been looking to experiment a little bit more. Well, Fritz, go play Khorne. Well, we're seeing what we can do. So tactically speaking, I don't see any way to build, and I'm not saying you'd want to do this or not, I don't see any way to build a fully close combat oriented Necron army. You're going to have strong elements of shooting. You're going to have shooting elements in there based on what you fill. And it's not like, whether it's competitive or not, you can shift everything over to the assault, which you can do with Blood Angels, which you can do with Space Marines, and which you can do with Khorne Berserkers, Chaos. That's not to say there are not shooting elements, but they're more short-ranged on there, and you pump all the model resources into that. So what could we do with a base of Flayed ones? We're going to kind of follow the Blind King on there, or maybe the Void Dragon. Essentially, what I'm seeing is warriors with an extra attack and a little bit of dice manipulation in there. So we're going to deep strike them in. We're going to just deposit them in somewhere on there, and deployment shutdown. Deployment shutdown is where deployment shutdown you need with an assault-based army. And I looked at this in a lot more detail. It's up on my Warhammer 40K podcast playlist on there. Essentially, you have your close combat army rushing into to meet your opponent. A good opponent is going to sit there and just shoot you on the way in, even if they're not fully shooty resources. So that's going to reduce your model count. And when you hit, you might not have what I define as critical mass. I'm seeing the assault elements in my head here, and it's kind of messing with me because I'm trying to think of like Necrons of assaulting and things like that. So you need to have critical model mass when you hit on there. That means being able to generate enough dice based on the losses you took on the way in so that you can wipe your opponent out in the assault on there. I mean, Blood Angel players, you guys know what I'm talking about on there. So one of the ways you get around and make sure that you have critical mass with models is dropping a bunch of stuff into your opponent's deployment zone, or turn one having something that can make it fast into your opponent's deployment zone. This way all the shooting goes on there. They have to. You're literally like, bam, there you are. All the shooting goes on there. That allows your stuff to cross the field. So Flayed ones, I'm thinking great for that. But with that, it's not really necessary because I'm going to have half or more than half shooty elements advancing forward. I'm able to trade shots on the way in on there. So I don't know about deployment shutdown. I mean, we could do that. Deployment lockdown. We could do that. Then I'm thinking, and this is pulling from some Grey Knight stuff, you know, if you suddenly inherited 60 Flayed ones, how would you utilize them on there? Would we drop them in midfield? Another thing with that benefits all armies to some extent, you want to focus fire, you want to concentrate your fire. You want to limit the places your opponent can move in their deployment zone and outside of their deployment zone. So you do this by controlling the midfield. Think of your gaming table, your last 40K game. Break it up into 3 bands. My deployment zone, where I'm standing, your deployment zone, where you're standing, and the midfield, that mid band on there, modified a little bit by deployment type, of course. So if you can drop a big, massive group of models, usually I would define this as a trash mob, cultist, conscripts, whatever's cheap in your army, gaunts, lock them down, synapse, ready to go. And physical model mass in the center of the table, you are now utilizing the constraints, the physical limitations of 40K being a more epic scale game on a small gaming size table where your opponent cannot move, for the most part, voluntarily, off the table edges. If I am in the middle, that means you might have some way to go over me, but you have to go through that blob. You're not going to do that. You have to either move to the left or to the right. This is going to divide your army and focus small models, small groups of models into these kill zones. So if I have my entire Necrons behind, if I drop the flayed ones in the middle, have my Necrons behind there, as you move up onto the left and onto the right side, or you move all the way left or all the way right, if you visualize that, all of my units are going to be in shooting range. Not all of your units are going to be in shooting range. That's one way I can see it. Where I lose with the flayed ones is the fact that they don't have any shooting on there. That now means, because usually when you want your trash mob in the center, they're just hanging out. They're just parked, and it's great if you can find a way to make them not break and to stay there. But they also want to trade some shots. They also want to kind of do something on there. The cultists, I'll bark off a couple of auto pistols and auto guns. Maybe I'll kill a couple of models, but mainly it's area denial. The casualties I create are a bonus to the dark gods. Flayed ones aren't going to do that. If I assault with the flayed ones, then I'm potentially moving off midfield, and I might be opening up that on there, and that's not to say I wouldn't assault. So I'm thinking more as a midfield deployment unit. Then, depending on the mission and how you play, advancing everything forward and having units or having backfield objectives or deployment zone holders in there. And these are all options, right? It's not one specific thing I'm always going to do with the flayed ones. These are kind of the options based on if I'm going into your deployment zone, the midfield, or my deployment zone. I could drop them in my deployment zone, a fire and forget, and just have them hold on there. The fact that they are not shooting is not that much of a big deal, simply because it would be long-range shots that we would be trading anyway, either me shooting, like got warriors or immortals in the back. They're not really going to get that many shots in. And likewise, the flayed ones are not going to really receive as many shots. But they're kind of hanging out there not doing much of anything. I could go, so that's if we're doing big units. Of course, then it opens up the thing, where the heck you can get all these flayed ones, and you could troll eBay for warriors and convert them, and I've seen some really great conversions on there. But that's a lot of model mass for an army that you don't really need to take many on there. I see flayed ones as a bolt-on, an add-on, meaning you take one unit for something specific on there, or to kind of open up other little strategies, or for the fun of adding out your Necron collection. I don't see them as a backbone of your army right now. Now, obviously, if you say I want to play maximum flayed ones and have a really themed list, okay, that's different. Commando units. Commando units are small little pockets of models that drop in or move to certain points on the table, and they just hang out. And the idea is really low points. If they absorb a round of shooting, if you take a powerful unit and you assault my commando unit, all right, you killed 5 flayed ones. You killed 10 cultists. You killed a small group of Space Marine scouts. You killed a small group of Gene Stealers. Okay. And you burned a finite game turn of 40K on that commando unit. So commando units I could see playing. You pop them in and you just kind of wait and you force your opponent to shoot, right? If they shoot at that unit and they have dice that really don't work, the gods are with you and they don't take out that unit, great, you burned a shooting turn doing nothing. If they do take it out, then okay, you burned a shooting turn taking that out, but hopefully other aspects of my army, in this case Necrons, moving forward doing other things on there. So I could see them, and in previous incarnations, and when I use them right now, I do use them as commando small pocket type units on there. That is the defined role I see, but there's other aspects, there's other units in the Necron army that can do that. But if I want to overload on them, I'm dragging through the gaming case, I'm overloading, how would we utilize these? So I guess I don't really have a full total answer, but I have options for my deployment zone, your deployment zone, and the midfield. And as a whole, as we're kind of just wargaming this out, This is the checklist. This is the thought process that I go through and I recommend when you're thinking about utilizing an unit in your army, regardless of what the faction is. On there, you ask this question, okay, in small groups, what does this thing do well? And if I do that with the unit, what is it going to buy me in terms of game momentum and game turns for the rest of my army? If I bulk up on there and I just take the max of the unit, do I gain, at what point do I no longer gain stuff just for bulking up? And what can it do? What can it do well? What can it do sort of well? And in the case of Flayed ones, I don't think that taking massive units is going to really, it's diminished returns, I guess, on there. Yeah, I'm okay looking at the attacks and stuff. They could chew through some stuff pretty fast. But in this age of 40K with massive shooting on there, they have to have other options. I turn that around and saying in my Coronate army, and again, that's up there in the YouTube archive. I've got deployment lockdown going down. I've got trash mobs moving up. My Zerkers, which are the heavy hitters, they're in the second wave. So by the time my trash mobs get done with you, and by the time my deployment lockdown units get done with you, I've inflicted enough losses that I have critical mass, and now I've got a lot of Zerkers coming in on that next wave on there with rhinos delivering them. So you're already weakened on your list, you're disjointed in theory, and I'm hitting you hard with that bolt pistol and that chainsword. Flayed ones, I don't really see that delivering, because what would be my lockdown for the Flayed ones when the Flayed ones are the lockdown, and what would be the other things going in there? Your thoughts on Flayed ones, and certainly I've always said you guys are my secret weapon. In the comments and the feedback, what Flayed ones tactics should I be looking at? Suggestions, videos, links. You can get me on the channel here or over on my blog. More Necrons to come.